I encounter a lot of self-destructiveness and self-alienation in the topics that I bring up in my channel, and I wonder if these can be addressed by dealing with the more easily talked about small things first and then letting people work their way up. So then I thought I might try to deal with one of these aspects of these questions by starting with something that seems relatively trivial and apparently unimportant, but which nevertheless comes up a lot in questions of whether we can accept ourselves, prolong our own lives, and see ourselves as something worth preserving. There's a assumption in the first volume of Tesseracts, an anthology of Canadian science fiction and fantasy. It says at the end that the theme of the anthology turned out to be, "We've met the alien, and the alien is us." And paraphrasing of saying from the comic strip Pogo, which was, "We've met the enemy, and the enemy is us." So there's a greater ability to see oneself as the enemy in Canadian literature, although that isn't necessarily a healthy thing if you don't move beyond that. There's a way of showing this in that various cultures that I've looked at don't seem to own up to strange ways of using the letter O and U in combination when they pronounce their words. The classic displacement of strangeness within myself, within oneself, put onto somebody else, is the way that South Park made famous by claiming that Canadians say Aboot. I don't know anyone who actually says Aboot, apart from one YouTuber who seems to have been thinking about it too much and internalized it in his own speech until he's actually started saying it, at least consciously, but when he reverts to his traditional pronunciation, when he's speaking more quickly or not thinking about it as much, he goes back to a two-vowel pronunciation, a diphthong, not a skimpy bathing suit, but two vowels pronounced in close association with each other. The in the Canadian case, and the oo sound. Some examinations of this have gone really far down the rabbit hole, but I think one way we can look at this is looking at who actually does pronounce the U. Number one example, of course, is people who've watched South Park. I don't know of anybody who has this singular pronunciation where it's only the oo sound and not in combination with some version of the O sound. So the people who say Aboot are the people who've been watching the show and think they're imitating Canadians, but are actually pronouncing something which is part of their own speech. It's just combined with another vowel, and it's also combined with another vowel when Canadians speak it, but not generally exactly the same vowel sound. The difference comes up in how the O sound is pronounced, not the U sound. I think in Canadians and Americans generally are pronouncing the U the same way. Now, this is most easily seen in the way that a native German speaker, will speak English, because they tend to separate the components of the speech. So they are split off from each other, and you can hear them more easily individually. And I'll try to link to this in a video on a woman who says how to do a German accent. She says the word Aboot. She actually pronounces one after the other, so you can hear both of them in succession. English speakers tend to bring the two parts together a little bit more. But there is one classic sound, at least according to Scottish Murmurs ASMR, who does a lot of these Scottish accents, particularly the Glaswegian accent, where she produces something closer to the South Park sound. And that is when she says, and we are going to go back, no, now to Glasgow. Now, so it's an a-oo, and that's close to the Canadian sound. You can hear it more strongly in the way she says it in several of her videos when she does her Glaswegian or her default Scottish accent. It seems to be the one she does most often. There's also, I think, a trace of this in some Irish speakers, in that they will say you, like as in cute. So they say abayut, roughly sounding like that. There's also a Tibetan version of this, because when you deal with the O and the U, you generally come up in some way with ideas of alienness or ascension or doing something a little bit out of the ordinary, occult or whatever. And one of these is, of course, the mantra, which is Aum. So anyone with an anxiety about alienness, it tends to bring this out in their speech and pretend they're not doing it and displace it onto somebody else. I found one analysis of what is supposedly different about the way Canadians pronounce about. And this was done in writing, and I'll try and link to it. And the first example someone thought of as an American is Tom DeLonge, who shifts his vowels a lot when he sings. But he's also, of course, well known for being a UFO popularizer. So when bringing up the question of how we pronounce O and U, this writer brought up the question of alienness, perhaps subconsciously at the same time. Another way this comes out is in David Wilcock's presentations, where he gets people to do prayers after his talk. And he has people do this by making much the same sounds that you would have in the about. He tells people to make those noises as well. Except that he sounds a little more Canadian because he doesn't have a very deep voice. And one way I think you can make a more American sound and deal with the question of what they call Canadian raising is by starting at a lower pitch when you do the O sound. So you do ah rather than ah. And you can produce this both without lifting the tongue like Canadians are supposed to be doing, by just putting in a lower pitch. So we say about rather than about. In my case, I think I'm almost doing 3 vowel sounds. Another way that this question of alienness comes up in that there's a video on the fact that people usually see or hallucinate owls in association with abduction experiences. So they'll see an owl just before or after or when they're thinking about aliens. Of course, the U and the O occur in the word UFO as well. There's something that's brought into association with the idea of alienness. There's a way of pronouncing the U as I see it, which is not really the Canadian raising of the tongue, and that is just simply when you pronounce a U, you're puckering, you go ooh, ooh, rather than lifting the tongue up. And I wonder if this Canadian raising really exists the way it's told. It doesn't seem to be too familiar to me. But in any event, these are ways I see it in which people go through levels of disclosure or coming to terms with the idea of simply preserving ourselves and lengthening our lives as we are. Because the UFO disclosure, as I see it, is a distraction in a way from the big issue, the same way that Star Trek is, in that the Society of the Federation always has the means of making people young again and preserving their lives readily available, technologically available to anyone. But they don't do it. They go out into the stars as a substitute. And that it seems to be the thing that's being popularized now, in trying to move us to more a Star Trek world, thinking that the great transformation of human society will come from coming in contact with aliens, when it can really just come from within, from lengthening our own lives.